Alright, so here we are for another unboxing, and today we're going to be looking at the new ARRMA Mojave, which is a 1/7 scale 4-wheel drive brushless desert truck. Now, believe it or not, ARRMA have used the name Mojave in the past. Long before we got to see the 1/8 scale cars that kind of put ARRMA on the map, they had a 2-wheel drive version Mojave. And of course that truck got discontinued, and now of course it's come back, or at least the name has come back, but in a whole new form, a whole new scale, and a completely different sort of style. So this promises to be very, very cool, because the videos that I've seen of this truck so far, I think is probably going to give this one a very big title. It's the anticipation for this truck for those of us who like short course style trucks but really want to bash them and they want them to handle really well. I think ARRMA have actually done something really quite different from the other trucks that are available on the market. This one does not have a solid rear axle. It's all independent suspension, and I know that might anger some people or whatever, and of course there's other camps that really applaud this type of decision because it makes the truck handle a little bit better, although it doesn't have that scale realism of a traditional short desert truck, rather, that has the solid rear axle and the trailing arms. So I can understand the divide a little bit, but at the end of the day, these vehicles are designed to be bashed, and I think that's what ARRMA kind of went for. They didn't really go for the whole out scale design. They went for more of a bashable design, something that handles well, but is in the same realm as far as scale and performance as the other trucks that are out there. And I think they've done a pretty damn good job, judging by the looks of this truck and the videos that I've seen on it so far. So this is a big vehicle. It's advertised as a desert truck, capable of 60+ miles an hour, all waterproof components. We are going to be going through a little bit of detail in this unboxing because there are some parts that I want to discuss with you. There are some rumors floating around also regarding this truck that I want to put to rest, and I can't wait to show it to you all. So without further ado, let's get rid of that box. That was a big slap. That was actually probably a little bit harder than it needed to be. But it is a big box. It's a little bit heavy too, so had to compensate for that. This is what you get when you open it up. Of course, you get the truck, the radio, and a bag of goodies. Radio, we won't even talk about. I've discussed this radio in the past. You are all aware of my opinion of that radio, and I know that there's been a lot of other people out there that have been quite colourful in expressing their disappointment with the included radio with some of these cars. The DX2E needs to go. I'm pretty sure ARRMA's heard our calls for a new radio loud and clear, so let's just move on from that. Okay, bag of goodies. In here we have, let's see, the usual toolkit that you get with your 1/8 scale vehicles. They've included the same kit in here. Cross wrenches, Allen keys, and so forth. Good to sort of get you going, but you know, as I've said in the past, invest in some good tools. It's always good to have those. They don't give you any additional body posts or anything like that, but you do get a bag of extra pistons. There's a couple of different sizes in here. There's also a blank set, so you can drill out your own holes and tune the shocks however you want them to perform. That is there available to you for those of you who like to tinker and play around with suspension settings. High-speed pinion gear. I believe this is a 20-tooth pinion gear. I think the included one's a 15. So 15-tooth, usually pretty good just to bash around, and especially if you're going to be putting it in some high-stress conditions where it's going to have a lot of resistance, tall grass, bumpy terrain, and so forth. But if you're mainly on gravel, flat ground, you know, just short grass ovals, you can probably get away with something like this. Although, keep an eye on temps, okay? A lot of people get a little bit carried away sometimes and they can overheat things. So depending on how you drive and where you're driving, just keep an eye on temps if you are going to gear this up. Bind plug is also included. The radio should be pre-bound to the car, but in case you need to rebind it, bind plug is there for you. Sticker sheet, who doesn't like stickers? Plus they're pre-cut. These are awesome. Stick them on your toolbox, whatever. Put some extra ones on the car, up to you. Speed chart, as it has been provided in the past with some of the other cars. Battery dimensions are here. They talk about different pinion sizes, where it's ideal to run, so forth, kind of like what I just covered. So make sure you read through that if you're unsure. And then of course, everybody's bedtime story novel. The user manual. There is also a little leaflet in here regarding ARRMA's 2-year warranty, so make sure you read through that and understand it. And then of course the manual, which has exploded views, part numbers, has some maintenance tips and tricks and how to turn the car on, calibrate your ESC, the setting options for your ESC in case you want to change anything. There are limited options, but at least, you know, they kind of give you something to play around with. There's also, you know, how many run cycles you need before you need to start changing oil on your shocks, on your diffs, checking your tires, all of that type of stuff. Regarding the tires, we'll be talking about those in a little bit more detail later on. So that is the manual. Here is the truck. Let's bring this one up to the front and you guys can have a better look at it. Now I will give you some close-ups of this as well, but this will give you an idea of how big this truck is. So you got vents on the back of the body already. So this helps prevent a little bit of parachuting, I suppose. Now, something that I've kind of find interesting here is that the vents are above the, I guess the little bit here where it has all the figurines. So if the air is going into the body, these vents aren't really doing anything for you. You kind of need to vent the body back here or at the front somehow to prevent any sort of parachuting, because these guys are blocking any air sort of escaping. Of course, you can take them out if you are really going to send this thing and you want it to, you don't want the air to parachute the body too much. Take the little driver figures out, they're just bolted on, and that might help because of course there's no windows on this and you vent it at the back, so it'll help the air escape quite easily, at least I think it would. So that is kind of a close-up of the truck itself. We're going to quickly take this body off and just talk about the body in a little bit more detail. Let's see here. Now, something to keep in mind, the body is actually Velcro to the chassis on the sides. So you kind of have to grab it and just peel at it a little bit and you'll see it pops out quite easily. So there's the body there. That's how these guys are attached on here. And that's what it looks like. Now, there are two colors available in a ready to run, and there's a third color option as an option body. Now, I don't know why ARRMA did that. I would have preferred to have seen all three colors available in ready to run. But of course, you've got this color, which is a red and black. There's also a green and black. And then there's a third silver option, which also has matching silver wheels. Now, my personal preference here in regards to the wheels is that I would have preferred if they've just left them black, or a more neutral color for all three cars. The color matched wheels, in my personal opinion, this is just my opinion, it kind of cheapens it a little bit. It makes it look a little bit cheap. Maybe if they'd done like a beadlock style rim and the beadlock was matching the color of the body, so you had a black rim with a red beadlock, just a little ring, and then the green body would have a green beadlock, that kind of makes a bit more sense. But I need to critique a little bit, and just my personal preference would have been to have a bit more neutral color on the wheels. Of course, you do have these little skid plates. Just before I put this away, you got these little skids on the roof here, similar to what they did on the Infraction. So if you do flip this over, it's going to be, you know, sort of grinding on these plastic bits as opposed to sandblasting the roof of your truck. So really nice touch. I like that. Good on ARRMA for doing that. There's some scale details on the back here as well, but it's all molded. There's no like proper plastic fire extinguishers or anything like that you've seen on some of the other cars of this sort of style and size. I think the closest they've done here is of course just the figurines, but yeah, big body, beautiful body as well. Well done ARRMA on this one. And of course, let's not forget there's also a little plastic bit on the front grille of that body just to add a bit more extra protection. So here is this beautiful chassis that you see. That's what it looks like underneath. You can see the front bumper here. This one here is actually rubber. And of course, you've got the embossed ARRMA logo on here. And then the back just looks amazing. No mud flaps or anything like that. Perhaps I would have preferred some mud flaps on the back, just on the back. But look, it looks fine. It's totally fine. So this is where we start getting into the nitty-gritty of it, and hopefully I'll be able to give you guys some information that maybe you haven't heard in other videos about this truck. Suspension wise on this, sublime. ARRMA have always done really good suspension on their cars. It's very rare that you'll hear me critique and say, they could have done this a little bit differently. And of course, depending on how you like to run these cars, the suspension could be totally wrong for you. But for the most part, for the style of vehicle that it is, they generally get it right, or very close to right. So I can't knock them for the way that they've tuned this. There's an enormous amount of travel for something that is kind of like an oversized short course truck. This has amazing travel. It's monster truck suspension style, and it doesn't have trailing arms or anything like that. So very, very nicely done. Shock towers, as far as I could see, these are brand new shock towers, not being used on any of the other 1/8 scale cars. And now, of course, the chassis. Now, some people have said, you know, oh, it's just a Creighton chassis or Italian chassis with different arms, and they've put a short course body on it and they've called it a new car. Not true. This is actually a brand new chassis. It's longer than the Creighton and Italian. It's actually longer, wheel nut to wheel nut. It's actually longer than the Infraction and Limitless that you see behind me there. So this is a brand new chassis with a brand new length, and it's a completely different design. There's also been a bit of a rumor floating around. Someone asked me, you know, is this chassis 4mm stick? No, it's not. I actually measured it, and it is in fact 3mm stick, just like all the other 1/8 scale vehicles. Now, I know that that may upset some people, and I've heard some comments saying, oh, you know, they should have gone with the 4mm, they should have done this, they should have done that. But in order to stay, I think if you look at how these cars have improved over time, and what this truck specifically is designed for, I think it's going to be just fine, especially since, you know, I've seen some videos out there, because there were two guys that got this truck before me. One of them was Eric from RC Dude 81, the other one was JT. So both of those guys beat this truck pretty hard. Eric in particular was doing backflips with it off his ramp. And he wrecked the body up pretty badly, but the chassis and everything else on the truck remained intact. He didn't bend anything. I think he broke a couple of these body posts up, or body supports up the top here. But if you see how this thing was landing and the beat down that he gave it, understandable that he broke a couple of plastic little bits where it's, you know, the body mounts onto. And it didn't stop him from putting the body on. It's not like the body was flopping around or anything. It just had cracked a couple of bits of plastic. So pretty durable so far. I'm pretty impressed with the way that this, you know, what I've seen of this truck so far. Now, a couple of other shared parts that I found were the front and rear chassis braces. These are actually the same as what you'll find on the Italian V4. Not the previous Italians, or sorry, V3 onwards, not the V1 or V2. They were the same as the Creighton. The Italian V3, they kind of shifted everything a little bit more towards the center, and they made the chassis braces pretty much the same length. So these braces come straight off the Italian V3 or V4. Yeah, that's probably one of the parts that are shared here. Now you might be thinking, well, hang on, if they're sharing the same chassis brace, doesn't that mean that the chassis is the same length? Not correct. So the way that these are mounted is, on the Italian, the chassis braces kind of mount kind of a little bit hard up against the center diff. Here there's a little bit of a gap. Because the chassis is longer, the braces don't meet all the way to the center. There's a little bit of a space. But of course they can afford to do that because now they have the tower-to-tower brace. And because this chassis doesn't thin out as much as my Creighton chassis does towards the ends, hopefully we're not going to see any negative bends on this when I run it. So we'll see how this goes. And of course the other two guys haven't had any such issues either, so I'd have to be pretty unlucky, and it'd have to be a pretty big hit for that sort of thing to happen. Now, moving on to wheels and tires. As I said, the wheels, I mean, they look great. I just would have preferred a slightly different design. The tires, these are the same sort of style of tire that I think are on the Senton 3S and of course the Granite 4x4. The rubber compound doesn't feel quite as soft as those ones. I think on those other cars, the rubber compound feels a little bit softer. This is slightly harder. The foams feel a bit soft, and I think I've said this before, I kind of would prefer if ARRMA do kind of give us slightly denser foams on some of these cars. Maybe not all of them, but it just feels like the foams are real thin in here. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or a good thing. I just, compared to some of the other tires that are out there, these just feel a little bit like a really open cell foam. And given that these tires feel a little bit harder than some of the other ones, it just feels like a bit of a slight mismatch. Now, again, I'm not saying that it's not going to grip or it's not going to perform the way that it should, but I just feel that it would be nice to have something a little bit denser. Another interesting thing to note about the wheels and tires on here is that the wheels themselves are not vented, but the tires are vented. There are some holes on the tires, pretty much at opposite ends, and that's a really cool thing. That's something that ARRMA, I think, haven't done in the past. I think this is the first time they've done this on one of their ready-to-runs, and a lot of guys out there actually do this on their aftermarket tires. They seal up the holes of the wheels and they vent the tires themselves. The reason for that is it kind of stops a lot of stuff getting in there, and if you do run through water and stuff like that, any water that gets in there through the spinning of the tire, the water just gets expelled out through those holes. So really cool to see this. I think even Proline, from memory, have started doing some of this as well. So good to see tire manufacturers actually, looking at what the RC community is doing or what some of these other guys are doing and following suit, because obviously that's how people want to run these cars, is with vented tires, not necessarily the vented wheels. So I'll bring this up to the front again, and we'll talk about the front and rear bumpers and everything else. So very sturdy bumper on the front here, real beefy underneath, and you can see that it wraps around right underneath the diff. The arms are ridiculous. They are super strong. They look almost twice as thick as what you'd find on the other 1/8 scale cars. And then the bottom A-arm actually has this little aluminium ring around it here just to prevent it from splitting. And then of course you got your steering knuckles and so forth. Now the knuckles and all that I think are shared with all the other cars. And that makes sense to me. The least amount of unique parts that you can create on something like this, the more you're likely to keep costs down. And of course, for somebody like myself and a lot of you guys out there that have multiple ARRMA vehicles, well, you can just share parts between them. You buy a packet of steering knuckles, you've got some steering knuckles that pretty much fit on a variety of different cars that you have. So it kind of makes sense. The steering servo is still the same ADS 15 amp steering servo. I can see a lot of people watching this video or reading the specs of this truck online going, oh, that's the first thing I got to change. Again, I have had so many of these cars and I've yet to burn out one of these servos or even strip gears. And if I had done it, I would have shown it. And I can't, they're not the fastest. I know that they're not the fastest. They could be stronger. They always can. But they're adequate and they haven't failed on me. But people still manage to fail them, and I don't know why is it that I can't. Anyway, receiver box, of course, water sealed. We've seen that before. 150 amp ESC, 40, 74, 2050 kV brushless motor. This is the BLX 185 system that has been around now for a number of years. ARRMA kind of hit the nail on the head with this one. It's been such a versatile system. It's gone from just pushing these cars to 60 miles an hour. We're now getting cars at 70 miles an hour on the off-road sense. And of course the infraction rated at 80 miles an hour. I managed to get 84.5, and I've seen people clock up as close to, or maybe even beyond 90 k's an hour. But I think that might be with different punch settings and perhaps some tweaking with suspension and the spoiler and all this sort of stuff. So it's definitely a system that is being pushed quite hard. And I think some people have actually hit 100 miles an hour on the Limitless as well with the BLX 185 system. So this system, some people will argue and say, oh, no, why didn't they get a bigger motor and a bigger ESC for this type of scale? The system can definitely handle it. And if you can push this car to 60 plus miles an hour, well then, why do they need to change it out? As long as it doesn't overheat or it's not running at its limit, I think this system still has a few more years left in it. But as I've said before when I unboxed the infraction, it would be nice to see these bigger cars with the BLX 200 system, something a little bit bigger, slightly bigger motor. Maybe instead of a 74 can, maybe go to an 82 or a 90 or something like that. Just be nice to have something a little different in here. But who knows, maybe in the future we'll see a bit of a change. Battery tray is exactly the same as we've seen in the other cars. However, something to take note, and I noticed this as I was looking at the car just before unboxing it, there's actually some extra holes here on the chassis which I believe will allow you to move the battery tray further back. So if you have this set up in a way and you want it to perform somewhat differently, you can actually shift the battery tray back. So that's quite a cool feature, which I don't think a lot of the other 1/8 scale cars have got. Obviously they don't have the luxury of having such a long chassis either. The body posts are quite a unique design on this as well. So rather than having just a standard, 2 body posts, they've actually got 4 at each end. And then on top of that, there's this like cushioning system. So when you land upside down, there's a bit of give here. It's not just going to land straight onto the shock towers and completely destroy your body. On top of that, they've also got foam on top of the body posts here, which is something that I don't think I've seen ARRMA do with any of these other cars previously. So who knows, maybe we'll start to see this in some of the other cars in the future, this foam on top here. Very nice touch, ARRMA, I really like that. So very, very cool. The rear hinge pin brace on this car at the rear of the A-arms is new as well. It's quite beefy as well. And of course the rear bumper, my goodness, one of the biggest bumpers I think I've seen ARRMA do to date. This is pretty full on. So these things can definitely take a beating. The A-arms on the rear, ridiculous size as well. But I think the wheel hubs and everything is exactly the same as the other 1/8 scale cars. The rear drive shaft on this, I believe, is the same size. No, the front drive shaft on this is the same size as the rear drive shaft on the Kraton. Yes, I think I checked that. And the rear drive shaft is a new part. So the rear drive shaft is actually quite long as well. No doubt there'll be people out there probably who are going to upgrade these drive shafts to maybe something similar to what I've done on the Infraction and Limitless and got something a little bit thicker. But those being more speed cars, I can see the need for them. On these particular vehicles, you could probably do it, but it may not be typically necessary. So I think I've got most of this down by now. I think I've covered most of what you guys need to know. Of course, this little piece here, this is also found on the Italian V4s. We've talked about the shock towers. Steering column on this is a different part number to the other 1/8 scale cars, and I don't know, I can't tell why that is. Maybe there's a different height, maybe there's a different plastic, maybe there's something different about this. Maybe I read it wrong, but as far as I could tell, the steering columns on these are a little bit different. So kind of interesting to see that. Front and rear sway bars are of course pre-installed. Shock towers are 5mm thick as they are with all the other 1/8 scale cars. Running IC5 connectors, which of course are compatible with EC5 connectors. And just nice little touches here and there. Like they've actually put the on and off switch on a little stand so that it's not buried inside the chassis. So it's nice and easy for you to get to and turn the truck on and off. So just little things like this that you just go, you know what, they've actually thought about some of this stuff. And it's really trivial. Like a lot of people will look at that and go, who cares? But it's just these little things that they try to make our lives a little easier. And I really appreciate that. And, I think ARRMA have done a very, very good job with this truck. I can't wait to run it. I am dying to run this thing. The videos that I've seen, as I said, they look absolutely amazing. This thing goes like a bat out of hell. I've actually seen it wheelie. I think GT and Eric, both of them were popping wheelies with this thing. And you wouldn't think that it would do it, but it does. This desert truck will actually wheelie. I almost think that you should have incorporated a wheelie bar on the back here. I mean, they've got provisions almost for it back here. So similar to what they did on the Senton 3S, where they put 2 wheels on the back bumper, this almost warrants it. So very, very cool to see. I'm absolutely in love with this truck. I think ARRMA have done a very good job. And of course, I'll give you guys, I'll give you all a bit of a size comparison as well with some of the other cars as I kind of talk to you about it. But I really like this type of design. This type of bash vehicle I think is fantastic. I think it's great to have a point of difference compared to the other desert trucks that are out there. to have something that doesn't have that solid rear axle, that doesn't have those trailing arms. I think it offers something different. And there's nothing wrong with owning both styles. You'll have one that's a little bit more scale, that drives a bit differently, whilst you might have this one to really just bash all out, and maybe you can get a couple of them with some friends and go race them, and you know, it offers a point of difference. And I think that's good to have a little bit of variety, a little bit of competition. And yeah, I applaud ARRMA for taking a slightly different direction with this truck and not just following that particular trend. They've openly said that they're not into the scale side of things. They're not going to do solid axles. They're a company that makes bash vehicles, and in order to do that, in order to have something that handles well, they need that all independent suspension in all four corners, and I think it makes sense to me. So good on them. I'm really pleased with this truck. I'm glad I got one. And yeah, big shout out to Horizon and of course ARRMA for doing a really good job. I'm really looking forward to driving this thing and showing you all what it can do in my hands. I'm sure you've seen some of the other videos that are out there on YouTube, but yeah, now it's my turn. So I'm gonna go charge up some batteries. I need to change these connectors, of course, because I run XT150s, and yeah, stay tuned. I'll have a running video up as soon as the weather gets good enough and I have some time to do it. If of course you want to find out a little bit more about this truck, check the video description. I'll have links in there to the ARRMA website, Horizon's website, and of course Metro Hobbies here in Australia, where you can actually pick one of these up. There'll also be links in there to my social media pages, Patreon, so forth, and anything else that I would find interesting I'll put in there for you to go and check out. That is it from me. Thank you all very much for watching. Please be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you're new, and I'll be speaking to you all next time.